Legos are the greatest creation. We can make stuff just by using some random things, a man said while building a tower with Legos alongside his son. It was a calm night. Children were playing with Legos, everyone was relaxing at home, resting, watching Netflix. No one was outside. Today, everyone just wanted to rest and do nothing else. But in a corner of the city, there was total chaos. The police had gathered around a park, and the media were frantically trying to capture images. There were bodies, men, women, children scattered all around. They weren't just dead, each body was missing something. Some were missing eyes, others hair, and some had internal organs taken. What is happening in the city? Who is killing them? The media bombarded the officers with questions. What are the police doing? We are trying our best to solve the mystery. Please don't disturb us, an officer replied. Are the people in the city no longer safe? The police can't seem to catch the culprit or protect the victims. Is there any hope left? Is there anyone who can find the real killer? The media person's voice echoed through every home, spreading fear. But not everyone was scared. In a house full of negativity, there was one man sitting in front of his TV, with someone beside him. See, babe, this is all because of you. I didn't need to do all this, but because of you, I had to kill so many. Collecting their organs was tough, you know. I remember that lady, he pointed at the TV. That lady had such a beautiful face. Oh no, no, I don't mean that, you're more beautiful. What I was trying to say is, she was so beautiful I didn't want her to die, so I didn't kill her. I simply cut off her arm while she was lying on the ground. But, eventually, she died. So sad. He turned to his partner, and they gazed into each other's eyes, sharing a moment of affection. It's late now. Let's sleep. They both got up and headed to bed. Meanwhile, the officers were trying to connect the dots. Let's start from the beginning, the inspector said. First, in Gira Park, we found a lady's body where her face was missing. Then here, in Akashi Bog, we found a man's body with his skull missing. Then hair, teeth, fingers, hands, legs, liver, small intestine, another officer listed, pointing at various locations on the map. This man, the culprit, is stealing body parts from his victims, the inspector concluded. Why not collect all of them at once? Maybe for a reward. Might be. The officers started reviewing the reports they received from the forensic department. The bodies, the items found with the victims, the things around their bodies at the crime scenes, nothing had any fingerprints. The blood on the victims belonged only to them. There was nothing that could help the officers identify the murderer. This guy used places that were either totally isolated or where there were no people. It seems like he knows the city very well. We need more officers on night duty. Ask headquarters for additional manpower, the inspector announced. Letters were sent to headquarters, and they dispatched more officers to the city. The whole city began to look like a battlefield. Officers were stationed on every corner, and CCTV cameras were installed at every spot. The people were advised to stay home after 8 p.m. The officers were ensuring the murderer wouldn't get another chance, but did he need another chance? In the same old, filthy house, the man and his partner were once again sitting in front of the TV, enjoying a comedy show. She rested her head on his shoulder. The kettle started whistling. The tea was ready. Do you want me to get it? Or would you rather go? He asked. She shifted slightly, signaling for him to go. He got up, fetched 2 cups of tea, and returned. Tea with a hint of ginger. I tried a new recipe. Take a sip, he said, watching her as she reached for the cup. The cup slipped from her hand, and hot tea spilled all over her. He rushed to bring cold water while she winced in pain from the burn. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have filled the cup that much. I forgot your fingers aren't strong enough yet to lift heavy things. He poured cold water on her and helped her clean up. See what happened to you? You burned yourself. Now we need a doctor, or this could get serious. He applied first aid and went to get a doctor. On the way, he noticed officers everywhere. It was evening, and there was no one on the streets except the officers. Where are you going? An officer asked him. I'm going to get a doctor. My wife burned herself in an accident. I would have brought her, but I don't have enough money for a cab. There's a doctor nearby, and I just need to bring him home. The officer looked at him. He was wearing an old shirt with several holes, his shoes were torn, and his face was covered with a beard. He appeared to be a poor man living in a small house. Will you be able to pay the doctor's fee? I will. Here, take this. The officer handed him a few notes. Use this for the fee. Now hurry and get the doctor. He thanked the officer, took the money, and ran to the doctor's clinic. When he arrived, the doctor was attending to another patient. Wait here. Please fill out this form and pay the fee. The doctor will see you after this patient, the receptionist said. My wife is dying. She burned herself with hot tea, and her body is covered in red, burning marks. She's in terrible pain. Please come with me, doctor, he pleaded. The doctor replied, I'm sorry, I'm busy with this patient. This is an emergency, but you can take my nurse with you. She can help your wife. The nurse came over with a first aid kit, and they both left. The man led the nurse to his house. She was shocked. She couldn't believe her eyes. The house was old, the door hinges were rusted, and there was a strange smell throughout the house. The nurse became suspicious, but she continued anyway, wanting to help. "She's in this room," he said. Meanwhile, the officers remained on guard, their eyes scanning every corner. They were determined to ensure nothing went wrong in the city. The street lights flickered on as the sun set. It was now evening. Houses began to light up, and the city looked like a galaxy, twinkling with stars. There wasn't a soul on the streets, making the city feel calm and peaceful. "How's everything going?" the inspector asked one of his subordinates. "Yes, sir. The guards are stationed everywhere, making sure nothing happens. Special teams are patrolling the city, checking every corner. We've ensured that no restaurants or other establishments are open, except for hospitals and a few ration shops." "Good. Also, have the officers check the hospitals. Since the murderer is taking body parts, hospitals could be a prime location for acquiring them." "Sure, sir." The officers started checking every hospital on their route. They were making sure no strange man entered. "Sir, they've checked every hospital. Everything seems fine so far." The officers were relaxed, knowing that the night had been safe once again. They started taking turns sleeping. Those who were awake tried to stay alert, but were drowsy. They didn't notice the shadow. They didn't notice a man who had just crossed the street, using the shadow to hide himself from the camera. They didn't notice that a body was being dragged. In that old house, the man was alone with his wife. She was sleeping, and she was in pain. He, too, was in pain, seeing her suffer. "If I could, I would take this pain upon myself. I can't bear to see you suffer. That nurse did her best to help you, but this pain will last for a few days. Sleep, dear, I will be here for you. I hope the nurse made it home safely." There were many officers on the street. "I think they were looking for me. But it's okay. I'm here with you." He grabbed her hand and patted it. She slept. He started brushing her hair gently to make her more comfortable. Many days passed, and the man was happy to see his wife fully recovered. She could enjoy movies with him again. Because of the night curfew, the officers were tired all the time, and the residents were also weary from being confined to their homes. Business owners were facing huge losses. Restaurants were closing, and small shopkeepers, small clinics, and vendors were all struggling. During the day, everything was fine, businesses were running, but at night, everything had to close. People began protesting in the streets. They wanted their freedom back. They knew why the curfew was in place, but they protested anyway. The officers tried to convince the crowd. "Please understand, there's a killer out there who's killing people. We're trying to protect you. Please go back to your homes and let us do our job." "Trying to protect us? Why not trying to catch him instead?" the public shouted, erupting in rage. They had locked their kids inside and had taken to the streets to protest. The children, locked in their homes, were busy watching TV, playing games, and snacking all the time. Their schools were closed, and they had nothing to do. For adults, it was a prison, but for the children, it was fun time. A house, yellow in color with red borders around the windows, had a child inside. He was around 7 years old, watching TV. His parents were out doing some shopping, and they had asked the neighbors to look after him. There was a knock at the door. The child playfully opened it. A man stood there with chocolate in his hand. The child happily grabbed the chocolate and started eating it. His parents came back. They saw the door wide open. They quickly entered the house and saw their son sitting on the sofa, watching cartoons. Relieved, they approached him. The child's head fell to the floor at his mother's feet. The packet she was holding dropped from her hand. She was in shock. She grabbed the head, it was her son's. His body was still on the sofa, most of it cut open. She looked at her child's face again, and his eyes were missing. She started screaming. Her husband came running and called the police. The police were shocked to see such a crime. A child had been killed in such a manner. How much gruesomeness is left in that man? How mad is he? The officers were scared, not for themselves but for their families. The protesters were back in their houses. They stayed in, not for themselves, but for their kids this time. It seems this man first killed adults and is now going after kids. What's next? Pets. The inspector banged his desk. He was frustrated and tired. He was getting multiple calls from ministers and his seniors. He had no answers for any of them. His phone rang again, but this time, it wasn't his seniors. One of the guards called him. "Tell me you have some good news." "Sir, we've got some leads." The inspector asked his driver to start the car, and they drove to the location the guard had called from. It was near a clinic. "Yes, tell me," the inspector said as he arrived. "Sir, this is Dr. Mangendra. A few days ago, a man came to his clinic. He said his wife was injured and needed some help. His nurse went with him and never came back." "Why didn't you come to us?" the inspector asked the doctor. "That day I thought she had gone directly to her house, but the next day she didn't come. And then suddenly, the protests started, and I couldn't come," the doctor replied. "Can you tell us what he looked like?" "Yes, sir. His face was mostly covered by his beard, and he was wearing very old clothes and shoes. A strange smell was coming from him." The doctor tried to remember the man. "All this strange stuff, and yet you let the nurse go with him," the inspector shouted. "Someone was in need. As a doctor, I had to make sure everyone was cared for. I didn't know that poor-looking man would do something like that. Rubbish. Where did he take her? I'm not sure, but the last time I checked, she was near the abandoned Vana Mall, just behind it. How did you check? The inspector asked. Whenever she goes somewhere, she shares her live location with me. That way, if further help is needed at any house, we'll know where to go. That's a good strategy. Okay, let's go to Vana Mall. The inspector took his team and drove to the mall. They arrived at the mall. It had been abandoned for many years. The company had suffered huge losses. They had to sell the mall to another business, but that business also faced losses. They thought the mall was the reason and abandoned it. The workers, salespeople, and guards were all fired due to the sudden closing of the mall. The officers started looking around. They searched for nearby houses and noticed one that was very old. They approached the house and knocked on the door. There was no response. The officers decided to break into the house. They started checking every corner of the house. The inspector saw a woman sitting on the sofa. The TV was on. He went to ask her a few questions, but he and his team were shocked to see the woman. She was dead. Not just dead, her whole body had stitches, as if she had undergone multiple operations. Sir, see, her arms are different. And the color of her cheeks and nose is different, too. The officers started noticing the body. The body parts that were missing from the dead body, someone assembled them. Someone made this woman, one officer screamed. He was terrified. While some of the officers were checking the woman, a few others were searching the rest of the house. An officer went into a room. It was a small room with a few toys. It looked like a kid's room. The officer noticed something on the table. He bent down to get a better look. It was a pair of very small eyes, possibly belonging to a baby. He picked them up. Those belong to my baby, someone whispered. Before the officer could react, a rope wrapped around his neck, choking him. The officer died, but his struggle caused a huge commotion, which attracted the other officers. The man didn't have enough time to hide. He was caught. They put handcuffs around his wrists and made him sit on a chair. While the drivers prepared the cars to transfer the killer to jail, the inspector asked him. What did you do to the nurse? I killed her. My wife had burn marks, so I replaced her stomach with the nurse's. The nurse was happy to help. She wanted to help. Where is her body? I burned it. Why were you doing this? Because of her. She promised me that we would always stay together. But she left me. She died. But I wanted her. I wanted a family. I wanted a happy family. I couldn't get her. Her family took her body and burned her. They could have given her to me, but they burned her. I remembered her face perfectly. I made her again. She's sitting there, looking at me with her brown eyes. She's dead. You're not making anything. You're just killing people for your imagination. Imagination? I created her again. I created this whole family. I was about to have a baby before you all came. I was living a happy life. Those were people you killed. Not toys. You have no right to play with any life. We humans are nothing more than Legos. Just like we create and then destroy the structure to create something new, we die. We either get burned or buried, either way becoming useful for plants. Then the plants are used for wood or maybe for fruit. The man started smiling at the inspector. The driver came and put the killer in the car. The inspector turned to look at the woman. It seemed like she had tears in her eyes, tears of freedom. The inspector ordered the officers to take her body and match the DNA. The man sat silently in the car. When he saw his wife being taken away, he didn't react much. He just said, I created her once. I will create her again, and started laughing. The end.